Hey guys, thanks for inviting me to talk with you guys today. Okay, my name is Jeff, and I did my undergrad and grad studies at Queen's. And after I finished my master's, I moved back to Vancouver to kind of look for a job effectively. So while I was looking for a job, I was kind of sitting around kind of doing nothing. So I was thinking, well, I might as well kind of get on this iPhone app boom and start developing myself. So my idea was, as I was learning the Xcode language, I would kind of release applications as I went along. So my initial applications were fairly simple, and they didn't sell very well. So as time went on, a friend of mine decided that, hey, you mind if I join you? So I was like, sure. So at that point, our application quality skyrocketed as both of us worked together. So around March of last year, I kind of applied to EA on a whim. And what do you know, 10 months later, I kind of worked for them. So my official role there was as a front-end software engineer. So what that means is I was a person who would hook up the back-end code to kind of like the screen GUI elements that you see. So for instance, in the back-end, there might be an integer somewhere that it means health from 0 to 100. And on the screen, there'd be a visual bar that's nothing to full. I'd be the person who would grab that number in the back-end and then send that information back to the front. So things like that, populating high score tables and adding new menu items, those are all me. Okay, so the top two are the two games I worked on at EA. They are Fight Night Champion and NFL Training Camp. So I'll talk a little bit about both of them. So when I first joined EA, I was put into NFL Training Camp. Now this is an interesting product because it was made by a very small group of people, about 20 people. And I thought it was a great introduction to EA because with a small team, you really get to know everybody. So I think in total, there were 8 core programmers, 1 producer, and 1 development director, which is kind of like a manager, whereas a producer is kind of like the game designer. And the cool thing about this is like all the 8 programmers would sit together. You know, if I ever have a question, I could just pop my head over my desk or roll over my chair and I could talk to another programmer. If I had a question about a feature, then I'd just walk on over to a producer and ask them straight away. And it was pretty great in that it kind of felt like one big family. We're all in this together. And when that product finished, which is about 5 months, the whole cycle was probably about a year, but I entered halfway through about. And then at the end of August, I moved on over to Fight Night Champion. Now this is an entirely different beast. This is about a 100 people team. I still had that family feel with my core front-end engineers because we all sat together. But the rendering engineers were somewhere else. The gameplay engineers somewhere else. Whereas before I had 1 producer, this team had 3 producers that also sat somewhere else. So communication itself became a little bit more difficult because I couldn't just roll over my chair. I'd have to walk everywhere. If I had a question about grabbing some punch data somewhere, I'd have to walk on over to the gameplay area and talk to them. Where are the punch data? And then they'd tell me, and then I have to hook it up to the game. So I wouldn't say either of them were bad or good. It's just a different experience. Whereas a small team is kind of like this family feel. You know everybody. You know your neighbor. The big team was kind of like this well-oiled machine. Everybody had to have really good communication, talking with each other all the time. In terms of actual development, NFL Training Camp was exclusive for the Wii, so I got to get some experience working on the Wii platform. Fight Night Champion was next-gen consoles, so 360, PS3. And interestingly, there wasn't actually that much difference between them. The only difference was the tools you use to deploy it to the system. So for instance, when you're actually doing your day-to-day coding, it's all Visual Studio. And I'm sure all of you are used to Visual Studio by now. The difference is that when you take that code and then you put it onto your development kit, all that's different. So for the Wii, it's something called Wii Code Warrior. PS3, it's ProDG. For the Xbox, thankfully, it's also Visual Studio, so it's pretty simple. So all the same things happen. Like you deploy, you reset, you reload, all those things are the same, it's just different tools. So thankfully, all that was pretty simple. Moving on to the iPhone stuff, the reason I'm featuring these 3 products is bottom, is those are kind of like the ones I'm most proud of. Because these are the ones I made with another buddy of mine, Bernie Wong, and in a relatively short period of time. So on the left, we have Crystal Alliance, the guy with the big gun. That was about 4 months. The middle was Bunny Breeder. It's kind of silly. It's kind of like a flight control type of game. That took 1 month. And typing with volcanoes, we just had this crazy idea of having a simple typing game on our phone. That took 2 weeks. So in this short period of time, just 2 guys on their own can make pretty high quality games. I thought that was pretty cool. So moving on to the next slide, lessons learned. So I think the first thing is if you want to get into the industry, the first thing I would say is create a portfolio of games. And the reason I point this out is after my interview at EA, and I talked to the interviewer saying, why did you choose me over other candidates? And his first response was, well, you created a bunch of games. And I think his point was, it's one thing to be passionate about games, to love games, or have that killer idea. It's another thing to have that idea, design it, program it or develop it, test it, and then have a final deliverable product to show people. Well, obviously you can't show people during your interview, but I mean, people know, like, if you've gone through that entire process, they know that you know what it takes and all the challenges in creating a full-fledged game. So I'd say, any school projects you've done during your grad studies or undergrad, use them as examples of games that you've made. If you make games on your own, I mean, in this club, it seems like you're making a kind of weekly game contest, it seems. That seems pretty cool. I mean, all those examples are things that you can put on your CV and you can talk about that, hey, I made these games and I'd like to talk about them. As another example, I had another colleague on NFL training camp, and he told me a story about his interview, where the interviewer was, really impressed by his GPA, his schooling. What he was really interested in was when he talked about his own games. They went on a rant about, game design and things just right in their interview. So it's all about creating your own games and being really enthusiastic about knowing all that stuff. So secondly, is if you prepare to kind of go into the actual industry in terms of like big companies like EA or Ubisoft or something, some points to keep in mind is things I learned is you need really good communication. And the reason is, from day to day, you're obviously going to talk to your other programming buddies about programming questions and things like that. But very often, you'll have to approach producers about a feature you need to clarify. What do you mean by put a button here and what does it do? Things like that. It's really important to get your point across very clearly and quickly. Like, they're not going to get frustrated with you, but it's a good idea to be a social person and to readily accept talking with people. The second, it might be a no-brainer to most of you, but it helped me a lot, was to learn source code management. So things like having a shared repository of source code, syncing to the latest revision, committing your code, resolving conflicts in code, all these things. So if you know what jargon I talked about, you're probably okay. But for me, I actually never worked with that before until I say the last 3 iPhone products, when my buddy Bernie and I were like, hey, we're working on this code together now. We should have this shared code so we can put things there and then take things out, no problem, easy. I was like, okay, fine, let's do that. And thankfully, because I experienced with that, when I first saw it in the actual industry, I was like, oh, I know this stuff. It's pretty simple. It's a different tool, but I mean, it's the same concept. The third is to expect a lot of team meetings. Now, the thing is, in my mind, I thought I would just be heading there, heads down, coding all day. But very often you would have meetings all the time. So as an example, for NFL training camp, I think every day I had a team meeting with all members of the team. Remember, it was a small team, so like 20 people would gather around in a circle, and we just talk about what we did yesterday, what we're going to do today. I had bi-weekly meetings with my manager, tri-weekly meetings with my programming lead. On fight night, I had 2 times a week I'd meet with my front-end team, once a week with all the software engineers, so that's like 40 engineers, and then also once a week meetings with my manager. So meetings all the time. So just prepare to like kind of budget your time well, make sure that when you're programming, you're kind of in the zone and not kind of floating around. And finally, it's to engage in collaboration. So when you're creating games on your own, everything's in your head, you know everything. But once you're in the team environment, no one knows what's in your head. You have to effectively communicate this with everybody. And when you're programming, very often you will be interrupted. So, as a programmer, you know that when you get in the zone, you don't want to be bothered at all. But that's just not the case in studio life. Producers will come and ask you questions saying, hey, can we add this cool feature? Programmers will come, hey, can you help me out with this problem? So just be prepared that people will come to you with questions all the time, and be prepared and be friendly and open to kind of helping other people. And that's another thing, is to always be ready and be willing to help other people. And that's really like this mantra. I think it was a key mantra in EA was to be open and help other people. And it really was true. When I was there, I always felt that if I ever had a question, I would never be afraid to ask people, because everybody had this mentality of being really willing to help other people. And this helped in the sense that, you knew that you're in a friendly environment, you were never by yourself, and that whenever you had a problem, you wouldn't be afraid to ask people. So it really made a really friendly, open work environment. So that's effectively the end of my presentation, pretty short. So thanks for your time, guys.